Hey friends, in this video I want to show you a way on how you can hide your slicers and make them appear whenever you need them by creating a filter pane. There are several ways to do it and I'm going to show you one that is convenient also for duplicating this on other pages and when making adjustments. Stay tuned. So many times when you work with reports, at some point you get so many slicers that it takes up too much space in your report. Now to solve this, a common way to do this is to create filter panes. So it's a pane where you click on a button, it appears, and you get your slicers. After filtering the filters that you want to, you can then hide them again and continue using your report. So a functionality that can look like that is that this can be the end product. So we're looking at a report here. And on this page, instead of showing the filters like right visible here, there is a pane here where you can click on a button. And if you click on it, you see that the background gets a little bit more vague. And at the same time, you see the filter pane here pop up. And I will show you exactly how you can do this, but this will be the end result. Let's see if we can start from scratch. So this is a clean start, what a page could look like if you don't have a filter pane or any slicers. Now let's imagine you want to start creating a filter pane. A filter pane needs something to be triggered, so it's good to have a button for that. And one button that you can use for that is by going to the Insert tab, clicking on Shapes. And one of the shapes that I like is the one with the rounded corners here. This is what it looks like. Then for me, I want it to be rotated. So whenever you select it, you can go to Format Shape, click on Rotation, and click right here on 90 degrees. And by doing that, the rounded corners are now on the right side of the visual. This visual I can then make a little bit smaller. I put it on the left-hand pane here. And in this case, to make it aesthetically pleasing, I could make it as big as maybe the visual up here. Then, next part could be an indication for us that this is something that's clickable. So you can give this page a text. So you can go to text and say something like filters. And right now it says filters already in the right way. But if it doesn't, you can then go to rotation and click on text rotation right here. Okay. So this is the first step. But right now, if I click on it, nothing is happening. So the next step that is important is that we create some sort of panel with all of our slicers in there. And this is going to be a few separate steps together. And what I advise you to do is whenever you start doing this, go to the View tab, click on Selection, so you have a good idea of all the shapes that we're going to be using. Super important. We can use it to organize everything. And I also recommend giving it the right names. So for example, this panel here, it highlights the button that's called Shape. I would probably give it a separate name, something like a slicer, box, show box, something like that. The name doesn't matter too much as long as you remember what it does. So this is the slicer show button or the show box. The next step is that we're going to need some sort of panel. So go to Insert, Shapes, and I'm going to go for this first rectangle shape here. Here we go. And this shape is a little bit too obvious right now. So I'm first of all going to call this the slicer box. And we're going to format this one. I don't want it to have a fill. And I don't want it to have to outline either, but I do like it to have a border myself. And we can give it a bit of a radius. And by doing that, you can see that it has rounded corners here. And it's very subtle what's happening. So that looks good already. Then for me, whenever you click on that button to show the slicers, I like the slicer panel to go over the other box. So I make it the same size as this one, and we can maybe put it right here. Now, as it is right now, it's not showing anything yet. So a next step could be to perhaps add something like a text box on top so that we can give this one a name. So you can go to Insert, click on Text Box, and we can call this something like Filter Pane, which we can make a little bit bigger. And I like to make it bold and maybe in the color of your theme, something like this. Then because it's text, then the field automatically has a background. Let's put it up here. And for this little text field, I can just remove the background right there. So this is starting to look like something, but it's only the text box and the filter pane. And already I'm going to go here and rename this text box to slicer title. And as you can see, we already have some items that belong together, but soon we are going to get the slicers as well. And we want to group all of these things together. So what we can start doing is to group the things that belong together. So if I first get the slicer title and the slicer box, you can click on the three dots and group them. And we can name this one as the slicer panel. And now within that part that we grouped in the selection pane, we can see which items belong to it. That's how it starts. And the fun part is that we can now, all of the things that are within that slicer panel, if I make it disappear, all of the items within disappear. And of course, if I click again, they appear again. That's the first part. Let's see if we can add our first slicer here. So there is a button here that will add a slicer to the page. It's huge. And perhaps the first slicer we could add is going to the date. And something interesting could be to have a calendar year in the slicer. I'm going to rename this one to year. And then perhaps see if I can make it a little bit smaller. That's a little bit too small, exactly. So our first slicer will be the year slicer. And then you just position it in the way you want to. And I think I'm going to want to have a drop down instead of the moving bars. So this is the first one. Also, the element that we just added is called slicer, but I like to add like what kind of slicer it is. So I can say slicer year. And this slicer year, I'm going to move it again in the slicer panel. Now what's important here is also the order. So the higher in this panel a visual is, the more on top it will also be shown. So this slicer box here is in the bottom, which means that one comes first, but on top of it is the year and the title object. If we do it the other way around, like this, you're going to find that the background of the box is now covering the slicer and the title. So be careful of the order that you want to put this in. But I'm going to put it right back here. And the year is going to be on top. And this will be the desired order for now. Now, to make things fun, a slicer pane with only a single box, like a single slicer, is not much. So I'm just going to copy paste this. And instead of year, we could also perhaps have a customer name. So we can go for, well, let's say a first name, for example. We're curious about the first name of a customer. First name. So then again, I renamed this object so I can recognize it later. It seems like a lot of work, but especially if you're going to copy this to new pages later, it's going to be helpful. So this will be this slicer first name. And again, we move it into the panel, which will be right here. Okay, well, that's enough for our first part, I think. Now the sizing isn't great yet, but let's just see if we can make this work. So what we can see is with the eye here, I can make it appear and I can make it disappear. But what we still need is a button to make it appear or disappear. So what I like to do is add a like an arrow in the top here. So you can go to insert, you can go to shapes or buttons. And then the reset one is one that I really enjoy looking at. And this reset one, we can make it a little bit smaller like this. What I usually do is put it in the corner here. And then I like to give this icon my color, just like the rest of the report. So this new button that we added is going to be the slicer return button. And again, we added in the panel here. Perfect. Okay, so far we've only looked at the elements that will make our pane. We also need to be able to configure the hiding and the appearing of this. And to do that, you have to use bookmarks. So bookmarks are helpful in here because if you go to view, you can open the bookmarks pane. And I see I still have a few from the setup that I had. Well, let's just remove it for now. Okay, so this setup that I have here, what I can do is make a snapshot of the items that are visible and the items that should be invisible. And I can save those as a bookmark. So for example, I now have a slicer pane and a slicer show box, these two. Let's first of all group these together so they are in a single slicer item. So we can call this slicers. Perfect. And what we can see now is that the slicer panel is visible, but the show box also has some visibility still. So for the first state, I would like to have this the show box invisible and the slicer panel, I want it visible. Okay, look carefully now. If we now select the items that we want to save the state of, so I select these two now, I can then click Add Bookmark, and I like to give it a good name. So filter pane, that's the page name, and then I like to shade like the current state shows the slicer. So I like to call this one Show Slicers. And if I make this one disappear, and I then click again on the bookmark, it makes it appear automatically again. But be careful, click on the three dots, and we only wanted to change the state of the selected visuals and not the entire page, because we only need the switches in the slicer panel. So we can now say selected visuals and remove the data part. And this is the ideal setting for all of what we need. Because the data part, we also don't need to save the state of that. The only thing that is relevant for us is to display the items and do it for the selected visuals. Now let's also save the state when they should disappear. So we can do it the other way around, reversed. So in a hidden state, things should look like this. And you can then click on Add. Make sure it's called Filter Pane Hide Slicers. And then again, click on the three dots, make sure the data part is not saved, and also the selected visuals is selected. And by clicking on these, we can show and hide it. So that's basically what we want to assign to a button now. Okay, I'm going to close this one for now. And when we click on the button that we created earlier, there's actually a setting in the bottom at Action over here. And if you click on Action, you can assign an action to the button right there. So what we want to do is click on the type bookmark. And when you click on this button, you want it to show the slicer, so our first bookmark. And now in Power BI Desktop, if you click Control and you click on the button, it's going to show us the filter pane. And then the arrow right here, it does not have any navigation right now at all, but we can edit it. So by clicking on it, going to Action, clicking on Bookmark, and then saying Hide Slicers, we can now assign that action to this bookmark. So we can now click it away and open it up. And it's not taking us quite as much real estate in our page as it would if we would add the slices everywhere. Now, I'm showing you all these steps here, and to you it might feel like it's a lot of work to get the descriptions in there and to group everything. But let me show you the benefit of this. So let's say, for example, these are the slicers, and at some point you decide you want some extra slicers on your page. So instead of year and first name, we want some others. So then what you could do is you could copy one of these slicers and Control C. And then I have a Control V for the next one. And let's say instead of customer, perhaps I'd like to see the product category name. So I go to visualizations, I have my bookmark selected, and I click on product category name. I was a little bit too quick here. Let's see. So product category. Now notice what happens. In the top of our selection pane, we now have something called slicer first name. And because we have not assigned any action to it, if you click away here on the button, you see that the slicer is still visible. And when you click on the filter pane again, it's also visible because it's the top item. So what you always need to do when you add something new is make sure the bookmark catches it. Now, it would be very, very bothersome if every time you had to select these things here and then go to bookmarks and press update. So that's something that you don't want to do. And we did this extra work in the beginning, grouping our visuals so that we don't actually have to do this, because our bookmarks actually look at the groups that we created. So we have a group called Slicer Panel, and within the Slicer Panel are all kinds of items. And the only thing we need to do with this new slicer here is we rename it, first of all, to product category. And then you can just click on it, drag and drop it within the slicer panel. And because it's in here, you're going to find that when I click on hide slicers, it's going to hide the entire group. So that's everything that's added to it. And when I click on show slicers, it's going to actually show everything within the group again. So it's hide and show, hide and show. And of course, by clicking here, that's the same action as clicking on the button right there. Now, the same goes for if this page you would copy paste. I could, for example, make a duplicate. Then on this new page, actually the bookmarks are not working properly anymore. So if I click here, it's going to transfer us back to the first page. So out here on your new page, you do have to do some configuration. So again, if you have everything configured like the way I showed you, you just have to select the two groups. So the show box and the slicer panel. And you would then say, let's say the duplicate hide slicers. That's the first state. And then of course, if you click on this one, we can make a selection again. And we can call this one duplicate show slicers, with all the suggestions of selected visuals and the options that we just discussed. And now if you hide and show it, it's working again as it should. So the work you have when you duplicate your slicers is that you need to reconfigure your bookmarks. But if you ever need to add a new slicer to your bookmark field, then it's relatively easy. Okay, so these are the basics. Now you can make your slicer panel in all kinds of ways. So something that I like to add is some sort of background. So if you want some sort of visual cue that the slicer is out, what we could work on is to try and see if we can make the background a little bit grayish. And how you can go for to achieve that is you go to Home and Insert, and you go to one of the shapes, and you just grab the rectangle here. And this rectangle, I'm just going to put it all over the page here. And what I want to do with this rectangle is make sure that it doesn't have any fill. Let's see. There is a background here, and here comes the key. The background, I want to have it transparent and maybe a little bit grayish. There we go. So this is what the state could look like when we have the slicers out. Now we can call this slicer one, like a slicer blur background. And you can have this item, if you like, as one of the items right here. So the blur background will be underneath the show box. Okay. And if we make everything visible, like I will click on the show box and open things up. And this is what everything could look like in theory. Now we need to update the bookmarks still. So you can go to bookmarks, and now we have 3 groups that should be shown. So whenever I show my slicers, I want to have my blur background, I want to have my show box, and I want to have the state of the slicer panel. So I'm going to update that one. And then when I hide my slicers, I also want to hide the blurred background. So again, these 3 items I will select. And then when the slicers are hidden, I just update it, and it will take the state of all the selected items again. And now whenever I'm going to click on the filter pane here, you'll see that the background gets blurred and it disappears whenever I click this away. So that's another cue you can add to your filter pane. Another thing you could think about is to maybe place your filter somewhere else. So I put it on the left right here, but if you like, you could of course also download a shape from the internet, like an hamburger menu. But for the sake of this video, let's just grab a button that we have. And perhaps this bookmark right here. I could instead also place it in the top. So this button here, perhaps it looks good to have it here. Then you just format it to not have a background. I can have the icon be, for example, white. And then again, you can actually say that the shape, the bookmark should actually show the slicers. So whenever we click on this, these slicers are going to appear. And perhaps we could even move these boxes all the way to the right. Here we go. Now what's left, of course, is to put the button from the slicer down here a bit. So that whenever we make it disappear, by clicking, then it hides. That's a little bit of your own taste. So sometimes I like to put it in the right top. And perhaps for other occasions, you also like to enjoy put the filters on the left or the right. Most important to remember is to group your visuals, make sure you give it good names, and to basically apply the bookmarks to any of the items you want to use. Now, I hope this is bringing you value. I'm going to be releasing more of these kind of videos. Let me know what kind of tricks you are using to make your reports more user-friendly. I'd love to learn about it. I'm still learning every week. And if there's any fun suggestions, also let me know in the comments. And then I'll see you next time.